Welcome, everybody, to the October episode of the South Dakota Forest Health Workshop Series brought to you by the South Dakota Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources. I'm Tony Seidel, your moderator for this workshop, and of course, I'm joined by Dr. John Ball, your host. Today, we'll be discussing herbicide management for windbreaks and landscapes, a very specific but very interesting and topical uh, topic for our area and the time of year. So we're thrilled to have you join us. I see almost 70 people on the call. Feel free to, in the chat box, let us know where you're calling in from, where you're listening from, and maybe even how herbicide management is relevant to you. Also, if you are a certified arborist through the International Society of Arboriculture, stick around for the end of Dr. Ball's presentation. There will be a code for you to self-report a one credential. If you are a certified forester through the Society of American Forestry, then please put your credentials in the chat box, and I'll make sure those get in the right hands to be reported for that CEU. We are recording this workshop. The recording gets trimmed down to size and put up on our YouTube playlist. I have put that link in our chat box already. There's about 25, well, there's 25 videos from previous workshops there on all different topics related to trees in our region. So we're happy to have you here. Hope you're excited to learn something about some herbicides. I know I am. Dr. Ball, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony. And not that it's important, but my camera seems to be going on and off, so I'm just leaving it off for right now. You need to look at the slides more than me anyway. So thank you for participating on this today. It's going to be a little different than a lot of the past ones because the past ones have focused on herbicide injury from someone else. In other words, drift from adjacent fields or such. Where today I'm really talking about herbicide management. In other words, what we do as applicators and problems that can occur. We're going to start out by looking at windbreaks, and then we're going to talk about the landscape. And then I saved a few moments for just an update, just a few slides on some current problems we're seeing and the latest where is EAB in the Dakotas. And no, it hasn't suddenly moved in the last few weeks, but nevertheless, let everybody know where, at least probably for this year, where we have confirmed it. So with that, I'm going to get her started here. Let's see here. There we go. So we'll start with the windbreaks. And a good reminder to everybody is weed control is essential. We have to have it. When you're going out and looking at this and you're trying to find the seedlings, it can be kind of tough. Now, actually, this slide, it's a little bit better than it looks only because of the fabric. But you can see that had they planted them without fabrics, which is really one way of managing weeds, they would have been really in tough straits. And obviously, some more management would be essential. So let's take a look at it. And again, we'll be talking mostly about chemical herbicides, but we'll be talking about fabric as well. You know, we have really two major groups, the non-selective herbicides and really the selective. The non-selective, glyphosate, probably one of our best examples, but not the only. We usually put that down to prepare a field for planting, particularly if it had been a pasture. Clear out all those grasses and that so that we can plant in bare soil. Can also be important in some field conditions as well. But then we have pre-emergent herbicides. Now, I really want to talk a little bit about these today because too often people are taking those as, oh, wait a minute, they only kill seeds. And by the way, that's not quite correct. They kill the germinating seedling. And so that really can't harm a woody plant because it's not a seed. And it does. And we're going to go into that. But that phrase right below it, apply after soil settles, is very critical. And I'll show you some examples of what happens when you don't. A lot of these are water activated, of course, and casseron, I'm just putting that down as an example of a pre-emergence. And then we have post-emergent herbicides. These are foliage active, can obviously affect root systems as well. They're typically those sprayed, applied to the leaves and the shoot. Now, they can also harm trees if they're applied during active growth, for example. There's some that specifically state, that you can apply it, but not during bud break as that new shoot's coming out, but later on in the summer you can, or you can do it before bud break. If you're applying it higher than the label rate, which I'm sure makes sense to everyone, or what did you add to it? Surfactant, for example, or some other product in there. And I've seen injury because not of the herbicide itself, but what they added to the herbicide. And these herbicides can act through contact or translocation. Transline, again, as just an example of one of these, and that one goes after broadleaf weeds. But let's start right from the beginning. You're going to plant and hopefully not have to endure something like this where you can barely see the seedlings. Well, to get everything started, particularly if it was pasture beforehand, is pre-plant. Now, I want to remind everybody of carryover issues. We have talked about that before during other workshops in the series. But a reminder, our two most common problems for crops is atrazine carryover, and for pastures, picloram. And every year I see more, I shouldn't say more and more, but I do answer questions on these. And I will say I'm getting fewer questions or concerns from the districts because they're asking that question to producers. Well, what was this land used for this year or last year? What chemicals were utilized? And so we can take a look at the carryover. And as a reminder, we do have a fact sheet on this carryover and planting bare root tree seedlings in new windbreaks. And I want to remind everybody that you can have a herbicide in the soil that is not affecting established trees, but can kill seedlings, newly planted seedlings. So it's not just enough to go, well, is that herbicide harmful to trees? But more, is that herbicide harmful to newly planted bare root trees? And in our bulletin here, that's what we're focused on. And there's the emails or the link to get to it. But again, we list as many as we can, a couple of pages. And as you see here, atrazine, quite frequently used for corn. Look at the carryover, 36 months, 3 years. And we try to be conservative in that too, people. It doesn't mean you can't get away with planting earlier than waiting 3 years. Depends on the soil pH. It depends on the amount of organic matter in the soil. It depends on the texture of the soil. So there's a lot of factors get into it. But if you say, well, I want to be absolutely safe, well, then you're looking at 3 years. And I can't think of too many circumstances where you dare plant, for example, within a year. So the pre-plant, as you're looking to put the herbicide in, well, glyphosate applied the year before planting and making sure there's an application done in the fall. If you're using glyphosate to kill off the vegetation that's in the rows or on the site, don't till it in for at least 10 days following the application. And you can till at about 2 to 4 week intervals. But I want to remind everybody, the more you cultivate, the more you till, the more moisture loss for the trees because you're moving that soil. And in some years, holding moisture is critical. And of course, if you do this too often, you're going to destroy the soil structure. It can be beneficial to soil structure if done just a couple of times, but it can be detrimental if overdone. You're not trying to turn the ground into powder. Now, usually we require several applications of glyphosate. For example, what happens is you kill everything, you wait, you till, that brings up more weed seeds, they germinate, you kill, and you can repeat that. But sometimes you also may need an application in the spring, about 2 weeks before planting, a week or two. Now, can I use a pre-emergent as well? And here it gets a little dicey. Treflan is probably it's one of our, I'll call it safest herbicides to use. We use it in containers. We use it for a lot of purposes. It's a good pre-emergence. It will kill, again, that germinating seed lean, if you will. But notice what it says, do not apply to newly transplanted ornamentals or nursery stock. Now, I do know people that use it as a pre-plant, either putting it down the fall before. It has a half-life of about 30 days. So if you're using it the season before, you're reasonably safe, unless it's too late. The other is that there are some people who use it as a pre-plant in the spring that they're planting, and that's a little dicey. You may not kill the seedlings. You may get them developing club roots on it, as my little sad drawing is showing. So the label says not to on the 5G. And by the way, there are different formulations of this. The 5G is used for nursery stock, but the 10 is not, for example. So make sure when you're buying Treflin, which is great on annual grasses and some of the broadleafs, that you're buying the right formulation that says the label says you can be using it on woody plants. And like I said, the labels will typically say post-planting, not before. Now, the issue with this too is it needs to be incorporated. You need to incorporate in the upper couple of inches of the soil, because what happens is these pre-emergence works by producing little chemical shield, if you will, to stop the development of roots and shoots from the seedlings. Well, one of the other things we do at planting is we do use fabric. I thought this was interesting. There was a great little study done, and they looked at, well, watering versus not watering, fabric versus no fabric, fabric and watering, and so on and so forth. And they found that the trees had better survival and growth with fabric than irrigation. Now, when you looked at the study, they were not dealing with some of the drought conditions we do out on the Dakotas. But nevertheless, fabric is critical. It does help retain moisture. It does guard space, so we have fewer weeds out there. And so fabric is used more and more and more, and it saves time, and it increases survival and growth. But you got to cut a hole for that little seedling to pull up through. And you're really, now you've got a dilemma. You cut it too big, you're going to get a lot of weeds coming up. You don't cut it big enough, you could end up girdling the tree as it grows. I've seen some that box these things, like this little seedling here, and of course they've opened it up so it's not too bad. Others cut X's or L's to it. It's nice to have something with a little bit of a flap to it so the tree can continue to grow rather than cutting such a large hole that you have weed problems in there. But I still see, and this was 2 weeks ago, young belts, usually in that 12 to 15 year age, where I get a call because they're getting some off-colored declining trees in their belt. And this was a West River belt of ponderosa pines. But look at that. The stakes were actually being incorporated into the trunk of the trees. And so I said, you got to pull those stakes out, and you've got to cut slits in there, relief slits, in order to allow that tree to expand. Because if they put the fabric underneath evergreens, they're shaded, so that fabric really doesn't break down and degrade as well as it does under hardwood species. Well, the big question is, okay, I'm getting weeds coming up now in that slit or that box that I created. What can you do? It's pretty tough. We do have some great herbicides that can be used as pre-emergent: Snapshot, Caseron, even Princep, with some cautions. And then I've even listed a few more at the bottom that are less often used, but still out there. But notice on this one, Snapshot, apply after the soil is settled around the seedling. One of the things that I've seen is when people put the seedlings in and maybe put Snapshotter down just before they've disturbed the soil, they've got air gaps in there, it has not settled, you can actually get injury. And Caseron there, notice that, apply 4 weeks after transplanting. And then Princep, they've got a don't apply to transplants less than 2 years old. And so when you're looking at using pre-emergence, really about the most common way you can do this is if you're not using fabric, because it's very difficult to go out and apply any of these products into that small area. And you run the risk of applying too much. Plus, you need to incorporate it. Now you may be disturbing that seedling you just planted and putting the herbicide on top of the fabric. You're not going to get enough going through it. So if you're just using cultivation rather than um, fabric, yeah, using this is fairly easy. But otherwise, it's pretty difficult to use a pre-emergence to clean out that vegetation that's coming up around the slit. Now, obviously, if it's already come up, a pre-emergent isn't going to work at all. But to go back after you planted the seedlings, wait 4 weeks or 3 weeks, and then incorporate it would be impractical in most cases. Now, most of these are for annual grasses and annual broadleaves too, but they some of them have control for perennials as well. But I'm seeing injury from this. And I do know some people have used Treflan before they've planted, incorporate in the soil a week or two, and have not seen any damage whatsoever. So I don't mean to say that you'll always see this injury, but I'm saying you can. And the label says you have to have the soil settled around these before you plant it. So use a great deal of caution. You do get better control with fall applications than spring. You usually want the soil temperatures at about 50 degrees or a little bit lower. And for all those folks in the Dakotas, we have just passed that threshold. Our soil temperatures are now right about 50 degrees and probably are going to hold there for a while. We're going to get some warm weather, but we're really at a good time period for the application of these pre-emergent herbicides for the following season. All right, though, but you're sitting here saying, John, but I'm already getting weeds coming up around my tree in that slit in that hole that I have to make large so that it isn't going to girdle it. Now what do I do? Well, a post-emergent herbicide. Now this is time consuming as well. Putting a little shield around a seedling, spraying it. Next one, a little shield, spraying it. Yes, it will take some time. And by the way, be certain you don't get any of that herbicide inside the shield because you don't want to end up coming in contact with the foliage of the tree. And obviously, you're doing it while that seedling's fairly small. In some cases, people have a slit cut in the side of the shield so they can slide it around a broadleaf tree that might be 2 feet tall, where trying to put the cylinder over top of it may be difficult. And I want to throw this caution out there too. Be very careful. If you're going to use 2,4-D or other phenoxy herbicides that volatilize very easily, you might say, well, I put a cone over it and I sprayed. Well, some of that product is going to volatilize, and that can end up damaging the tree as well. So be on the safe side, use the amine rather than the ester formulas that tend to volatilize much easier. Do not apply if the day temperatures are going to be above 85 degrees, because that also means you're probably going to get more volatilization. So putting the shield around helps, but you've got to watch the chemical too to be sure that it's not going to volatilize. And I do see that where people have ended up putting something around. I said, well, I just used it on the weeds and I shielded it. No, it can volatilize. And so you can get these phenoxy herbicides just because of the drift from the application you made beneath the plants. All right, well, let's take a look at some more weed problems. Well, after planting the post-emergence herbicides, now I'm listing a number of them here. These are not the only, this is not a recommendation for any particular one, nor is it a criticism of any one that I have not mentioned, but these are very common out there. So goal, post, milestone, transline, they each have their pluses and their minuses. But now you're killing germinating or weeds that have germinated. You're trying to take them out along the strip at the end of the fabric quite often, or even just managing in the rows between. Goal has pre and post emergence. Now that's primarily for annual broadleaf, less than about 4 inches tall. So you really want to get out there while these weeds are fairly young and growing. But for the trees, apply after bud break or after the foliage is hardened, but not active growth. And do not spray the foliage of the trees. So you got to be very careful for these applications when you're putting them down. Post, it's a post emergence for annuals and this, you're going after weeds that are a little bit taller. And by the way, fall applications are excellent. Trees are going dormant. Quite often they've dropped their leaves, though again, you still can get damage to the buds. But going out there at this time of year is excellent for weed control. It just gets translocated, you end up killing the weed. Milestone gets used a lot, but I really want to throw out this caution. It is used, it's labeled to control aspen, cottonwoods, elms, hackberry, any legume trees, and conifers, including junipers. They tell you right out that this could damage it. And why milestone is great on thistle, I can certainly tell you that. It can harm a lot of tree species. So read the label, of course, read any of the instructions, and they have the instructions as how this affects woody plants. And there's some you can get away with, but there's a long list of ones you cannot. So use caution if you're using that for thistle control or some of the others. Transline, same thing. Great on thistle, good pre-emergence or post-emergence for broadleafs. Don't apply to first-year transplants. So you always got to see if it's something that I can put down that first year. Usually the fall, the first year, you can probably get away with it. Certainly the second year. But lilacs, that'll hammer a lilac or any legume woody plant, particularly any legume. So pea shrub, honey locust, coffee tree. And I had an applicator that applied it for coffee trees, flat out killed most of them. And I said, well, the label says not to use it around legumes. He says, well, I didn't. I said, a coffee tree is a legume. So make sure you're aware of that. And the other thing, great weed control is mowing. Mow between the rows a couple of times during the growing season. Knock that stuff back. And then the last mowing, the one we may be coming up to now, would be mow it short. Otherwise, you've got a lot of hiding cover out there. You are going to get voles. And it looks like we've already got a real good population going into winter with voles and bunnies. They're everywhere. And so I expect we're going to see some injury to a number of our plants, but you're going to make it worse if you've got a lot of grass and brush and that around each of these small seedlings, because they'll just girdle everything there. Now, for the established, once you got them established in there, well, consider removing the fabric by year 5. But continue to mow a couple of times a year. If you can get the fabric out of there, it's done its job. We get issues after a while of soil going over fabric. People literally forgetting there's fabric there because it's been completely covered. And I'm actually getting questions from people like this one I stopped at. Well, can we remove the fabric now? You bet you can. I can't even see the fabric anymore. You got a thin layer of soil over top of it. So absolutely. You need that fabric for about 5 years, but you don't need it forever, and it can cause a lot of problems. And again, once the tree's established, if you possibly can, get the fabric out. Otherwise, cut very large relief holes. And it will break down over time. And again, occasional mowing to help keep that grass down. And that works great. And I've seen some windbreaks where it's essentially a lawn. And that reduces competition, makes it easy to get out there and work, reduces hiding cover. There's a lot, and it reduces weed seed too, by the way. So there's a lot of positives to this. Well, let's flip it around now and look at herbicide management for the landscape. Well, our biggest problem is weed and feeds. That right now, or let's say over the last few weeks, people have been going out and fertilizing their lawn. It makes sense. Good time to do it. gone out and bought fertilizer, and the fertilizer says it's a weed and feed product. Well, what's the weed product in there, you want to know? And let's start out with some of the basics. Make sure you've got your spreader set correctly. Adjust the setting. If they say, well, you're putting it down as a 7 1/4, make sure it's a 7 1/4, but make sure it's set right. You adjust the setting so that it's working properly. And it's an easy thing to do with a lot of these. Flip the darn spreader upside down, put your foot on the handle. You'll have a guideline for the adjustment. Okay, see that line right there? And then just use a crescent wrench, turn it until you've got it right set there. So you're applying the right amount of product. There's a lot of products that at the rate that it's being applied are fine, but if you overdo it, and you see people out there will say, well, I used 5,000 feet of weed and feed, and I only did a little bit of my front yard. Okay, well, now we have an over application. So make sure you adjust the settings on this first. And then check the herbicides listed as the weed. We want to make sure that, well, what actually are we applying out there? You can read everything for the fertilizer, but let's take a look at what it's being added to it. Now, dicamba is a particular concern. 2,4-D is as well, and there's a number of other chemicals you can find out there too. But you want to take a look, and if you see something like a dicamba on that label, in fact, in any case, read the label for any cautions about the use around trees. So you're buying a weed and feed, see what the weed is, what's being applied, and then take a look at the cautions for the bag of weed and feed as to, well, can I use it around trees? How close can I get to trees? Here's a good example. These are green ash, and you'd swear you're looking at emerald ash borer, but no, it's a people borer in this case. And when I stopped to look at this, I talked to the owner, and I'm looking at the tree, and I'm going, wow, look at that growth, that little strap-like growth on there. And I go, And I asked the owner because the damage was only on this one property. The green ash on the rest of the street looked fine. This is in Pierce, so EAB isn't found there yet. And I said, did you spray any herbicide? And he answered like most people did. Nope, didn't apply any herbicide. Did you fertilize? Yeah, fertilize my lawn. Do you have the bag? Amazingly, they often do. And look at that, right on there. Look at that dicamba in there. And again, it does have 2,4-D as well. But I go, oh my goodness. Well, now let's take a look at the cautions on this. And we see it on others too. Here's another property. Went out and looked, and that's what their green ash was down to. Little tough straps of growth. Same thing. Let's look at the caution. And look what the caution says. Do not use this product on or near or within the drip line of the roots of desirable trees, since injury may result. These weed and feed products are getting very common. In fact, I would prefer that you buy a feed product and then do any spot applications of a herbicide if need be. But this weed and feed is what everybody likes. I get it. One application, you take care of both. But you got to read the label. And then also read the cautions. And this idea of the drip line is long since been proven wrong. The idea that if I apply the herbicide in this little zone, signified by that dashed line beneath the tree, I'm not getting it over the roots. Where in reality, roots often extend about as far as the tree is tall. Now, I have seen a few more labels now that are saying don't use it within a distance equal to the height. And I'm really happy to see that. But still, a lot of labels are saying just don't use it within the drip line. And, if you take a look at a root system on here, I mean, equal to the tree's height. Now, the interesting thing, the density of roots decreases with distance. So if you say, well, John, I'm fertilizing just my tree, I don't have a lawn or whatever. Well, yes, we often put the fertilizer, I'll call it, within the drip line. Why? That's where our highest concentration of tree roots are. But in the case of a herbicide injury, we're not looking so much at density as to where they can be, period. And so when you look at a tree root system like this, and this is from Kim Coder's publication, that yes, we've got a lot of roots within about half the distance there. And they do extend further out. And my concern is you hit any root way out on the end there, you could still possibly do some damage. So my caution is always, if it says don't use it within the drip line, think, can I still apply this, but not use it within a distance equal to the height of the tree? Because that would be far safer. So don't say drip line. Say, okay, I'm going to use it, make sure I stay outside the height of the tree. Oh, but look at this one. This was a call I had this year where an ornamental pear tree just died. Look at that. The leaves just dried like that. And it went suddenly. And of course, when I got the call, ornamental pear tree going very quickly, my first thought was, well, that sounds like fire blight. Um, but it wasn't. What was interesting on this tree is the tree was in this pea gravel or rock. And they had several in the back that were the same way. And the lawn had been sprayed with T-zone. And right there's the label off T-zone. The concern I had here when I looked at it was really the dicamba again, though it has several others that you have to be careful of. Now, it says also on the label, dicamba is absorbed through the leaves and roots and has multiple modes of action for hard to kill broadleaf trees. And then combining this herbicide provides a very wide spectrum of weed control. Well, you don't want to spray it on any plant you don't want to kill. And you think, wait a minute, they didn't apply it around the tree. Clearly, they were outside the drip line of the tree. You might even say, I think they were outside a distance equal to the height of the tree. But one of the problems we have with ornamental pears is the rootstock they use. And some of these do sucker profusely, and you got it. Out into the lawn, you know what I was able to pull up from the roots are all these suckers coming up from the ornamental pear. And so while they were very careful in their application of dicamba, the problem was they were literally spraying part of the root system, which had come up, produced suckers, and it says do not apply to tree suckers. Well, unknowingly they did. They were not aware of that. But when I started looking at the yard and I said, take a look at these, let's get a little trowel and start digging it up. Wow, look at that. It's kind of connected. Yep, that's what killed the tree. And then all these ground clear products that are out there. You've got to be very, very careful with those. Most people are not reading the label. When I go out and look at a dead tree and then beneath it, I see this gravel, maybe a little black plastic, but I don't see a single weed. Yep, there it is. And this product's being used in more and more of these ground clear, ground kill, anything that says clear or kill, pretty much figure it's going to take out everything. It's not just going for any weeds coming up in there. And we saw it again this summer too. Another tree here, this was in Watertown, that they had made the application, and look at that growth on that tree as it's trying to survive that application. A lot of distorted growth. This one I just dealt with this week. Right where that circle is was a tree. And I forget what kind of tree it was, but he just decided to get rid of it, cut it down. And when he cut it down, he wanted to get rid of the stump as quickly as he could. So what he did is he sprayed the stump with Tordon all the way around the edge. Obviously, it doesn't break down stumps, but it will keep them from sprouting. But he sprayed all that, and lo and behold, 15 feet away, okay, were two birches, one in one direction, one in the other. Flat out killed him. I mean, the leaves crinkled, they're dry, they're gone. And it happened so suddenly, within 2 weeks, that he was calling me because he figured, well, it's probably what I applied. Because, and it says it right on the label as well, do not apply this on residential commercial lawns or near ornamental trees and shrubs. Well, in this case, he only applied it to the stump. Very much a directed spray. But notice the next sentence here. Untreated trees can occasionally be affected by root uptake of the herbicide through movement into the topsoil or by excretions of the product from the roots of nearby treated trees. It's what we call backflash. And I've seen this before with Tordon, pickle ram. Is you apply it in one area, maybe to kill a tree, or in this case, to spray a stump to keep it from sprouting. And then 15, 20 feet away, you start noticing other trees die, because what will happen with this product, it's absorbed into the root system, it's excreted out of the root system into the soil to be absorbed by nearby trees. So, for me, it's we'll grind the stump out as quickly as you can. That'll do it usually. And by the way, I forget the tree, but it wasn't a tree that typically suckers anyway. So he probably didn't need to do this at all. But again, this is one of those things I see maybe once or twice a year, but it's always kind of sad when you do. All right. Well, I did want to go over just a few more items before we finish up today, only because I'm still getting 2 or 3 calls a day on this. And it's the leaf spot disease of lilacs. I can see it from Spearfish to Brookings, from Yankton to Mobridge. I mean, it's statewide in South Dakota. It may be the same in Nebraska and in North Dakota. What happened this year is we had the wet weather and the cool weather right at the time where spores were being released. The perfect storm. We've had this disease occur in the past. It occurs every year. You'll always see a plant here or there affected. But like I say, this year, every common lilac was affected. And it's rare that we get the conditions that causes that widespread loss of plant materials. Well, let's say loss of their leaves. I think it was about 10 years ago we saw it. Now, all the calls I get from people, I say, look at the buds. Are the buds still plump? Are the globs still green? Can you bend the twigs? And everybody says, yep. And I say, leave it. Just leave it. The disease has run its course. It's going to be in all the fallen leaves. You can rake them up. That's great, but it's probably not going to help that much, but it gives you something to do. Should you spray a fungicide next year? Probably not. If you haven't seen it in the past, and that's why you're calling me, you're not likely to see it next year. It's rare that we get the weather conditions we need for the disease at precisely the right time. But this year it was perfect. And the other thing is, you may have lost the leaves in the lilac, but they're blooming. I was looking at lilacs flowering 3 days ago. It's amazing. Not a leaf on that plant, but they were flowering. This one still had some foliage you can see, and some of the foliage actually looked pretty good. But you'll also notice a lot of it was defoliated. What happened here is we had wet weather, then it went dry, and then it started going wet again. And that tricked these plants into blooming. The blooms do not harm the plants, but every flower you see now is one less flower you're going to see next spring. Just a couple of other updates here. Emerald ash borer, it's done for the year right now. They're burrowing into the sapwood to become prepupa. They are not feeding anymore. They're burrowing down into their chamber where they'll spend the winter. So they know winter's coming. They're going a little deeper in the tree. They're preparing for winter so they can survive those minus 20s, minus 30s. And as they're finding up in Canada now even surviving minus 40s up there. And that's how they'll spend the winter, curled like a cat for a long winter nap. And they'll be in this stage from October till next April, for South Dakota at least. And then they'll pupate next April. Notice that they're not bent anymore. They kind of shrink and stretch out, maybe like a cat again. And then the pupa in May, with the adults flying for most of South Dakota right about Memorial Day. A little earlier down at Dakota Dunes, just a tad later up at Millbank in the northern part of the state. Where is it found right now? In South Dakota, there's our current map. Our two latest finds were in Millbank, South Dakota, and Watertown, South Dakota. Both of those were in the summer, so they're not recent. But notice those, we jump a few counties, and we're down to Brookings, and we jump another county, and now we're down into Minnehaha, Lincoln, Union County, and by the way, the adjacent counties in Minnesota and in Iowa. That's kind of our hot spot. I still can't find it in Vermilion, despite looking, or Yankton, and I can't find it in Flandreau. But that doesn't mean it's not there, but we have not found it, so we cannot confirm it. But it has spread since 2018 in Sioux Falls, really kind of up and down the eastern edge of our state. And it's certainly also found now in Marshall, over in Lyons County. And then for the North Dakotans, and any Canadians, still that one spot at that rest area is where they found it. And it's in Moorhead too on the Minnesota side. And then it's also up in Winnipeg too. That has not moved much. But nevertheless, they have it there as well. So we're all up and down, and I'm sure next year we're going to find a few more. Pine wilt, same thing. Seen a lot of it this year. And here's an interesting thing. Typically, what we said with pine wilt is that you would see the tree start to decline in the summer and it'd be dead by fall. We're also seeing sometimes the trees discoloring in the spring and dying by summer. In other words, the infection may have occurred the previous fall, but they didn't present any symptoms. In fact, the needles looked okay until spring, and they went very quickly. So we may be seeing some that are taking a little bit longer to die of the disease. Nevertheless, the outcome's the same. They're dead within the year in that too. But a lot are like this. This is the beginning of the season, and notice you can see a couple of branches that are starting to discolor. Well, that same tree 3 months later, it was completely gone. And that's kind of the classic symptom, summer, and then it's gone by fall. And if you cut it down, that wood's as dry as could be, and you'll find it stained because the Sawyer beetle that carries the nematode also carries the blue stain fungus, and the nematode actually feeds on the blue stain fungus as well. So it's an interesting relationship, and you need all three to really get the disease going. And you need the correct nematode, by the way. We can find lots of nematodes in trees. Many algae feeders and that really not doing any damage, but this Pine wood nematode certainly is a pretty good killer, and it's vectored, carried by Sawyer beetles from its dead host over to a new host, and it does that in the spring. In fact, before the Sawyer beetle emerges, it actually releases a chemical which attracts the pinewood nematodes to hop on, literally, or hop in the case of this, because it transports in the tracheids as it's being moved to a new host. And you can see the new hosts where they've got the egg niches where egg laying occurred with the Sawyer beetles, and you can find their grubs in these trees as well. Our current distribution of pine wilt, as far as I know, it's not yet been confirmed in North Dakota. It should be very quick though, because we can find it in northern South Dakota, right up to, I literally can stand and look and see the North Dakota border. And then the southern half of Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa for a long time have been affected by that. But it's been a slow movement in South Dakota north as our summers have warmed. You need warm summer temperatures for the disease to really present. And if you look at a temperature, an average temperature about 72 degrees, that's what it takes. And notice on this chart here, most of North Dakota is still really too cool to see much of the disease. And northern part of South Dakota was the same way, but we crossed that threshold. And you look at the maps, and our summers have slowly been going from a mean July temperature of maybe 68, 70 degrees to more of the 72, 74 degrees for a mean. And now the disease just goes crazy. What do? Well, any tree that's died from pine wilt, cut it down, destroy the wood by April 1st. Don't use it as firewood. You're still going to have the Sawyer beetles come out of it. They're going to carry the nematodes, and they're going to go to a new host. The other thing is when you cut these trees down, cut the stump flush with the ground. If you don't, you're going to find that you've actually created a little reservoir of nematodes and Sawyer beetles. And then finally, this one, spotted lanternfly. No, we don't have it yet in the Dakotas, nor Nebraska, nor Iowa, nor Minnesota, but we're finding it farther and farther west than where it was originally located, which was Pennsylvania. And you find it always associated with tree of heaven. Now, it doesn't have to feed exclusively on tree of heaven in order to complete its development, but it is kind of a critical food source for part of its development. So if you don't have tree of heaven, you usually don't see as much of a problem. And this is pretty much a weed tree. The leaves look a little like a black walnut, but they have these small glands on the petioles to it, as seen here. But the insect, now it's not a fly and it's not a butterfly, it's a tree hopper here. But what it does is it sucks the sap out of the tree, produces just copious amounts of honeydew. So everything beneath the tree where these are on is sticky and then covered with sooty mold. Now, I took that picture 2 weeks ago when I was in Rochester, New York, and it's found there in a couple areas now. We found an expanding population, and nobody wants it. It's a recreational nightmare because the populations get so high. And you can see here on the trunk of a tree, they were everywhere, and just all that sap coming down, dripping away is just a mess covering everything. It will kill some fruit trees, certainly grape vineyards, I should say. But yeah, just the nuisance. Uh, you're stepping on them all the time. It's a mess. Makes mayflies look like nothing. Right now, though, they're in the egg mass. And if you ever see a tree, particularly a tree of heaven, and you notice this kind of almost like concrete, to be honest with you, but notice that texture to it. If you're in South Dakota, I'd certainly like to know about it because that's going to be worth a stop to take a look. The Nymphs hatch out of it fairly early in the spring, and you can see all the nymphs here, and they just wander around. They don't have wings, and they'll feed, and they go through what we call kind of a clown phase. They look really funny, and they're sucking sap all the time, and then become adults. Well, we have tree of heaven in the southern half of South Dakota. We will have this as a problem eventually, and that there's a tree in Sioux Falls used as an ornamental. You can see them right now. They'll be the females, at least. You'll see that they have all these seeds on them. It's another way to identify them. They've naturalized along the river system in South Dakota. We're going to be hard pressed to get rid of it. There they are in Dakota Dunes in the winter. And look at this tree. This tree, I took a picture of it. I was out at a house in Wagner, South Central South Dakota. And the homeowner had me there for another tree problem, but he said, well, I got a question on my walnut tree here. And I said, well, the first thing is it's not a walnut tree. He said, well, I wondered why I never got walnuts. Well, that's why. But again, that's a great host for tree of heaven. Tree of heaven is a great host for the spotted lanternfly. So you don't want these trees. Nobody wants them anyway. They sucker profusely. They're a weedy tree. Well, where is tree of heaven found? And there you go. It does slide a little bit more into southern Minnesota. And while I can find it in Sioux Falls, you don't find many. But if you look at that line, you'll notice what it follows. It follows the Missouri River. And you can find, in fact, there's a street tree in Pierre. And then all the way across over to the Badlands, following the Cheyenne and the White River. And in those communities like Kadoka, Wagner, Platte, we have lots of tree heavens, and all along the river system we do. So this may be one that North Dakotans get to dodge. It certainly won't be one the Nebraskans get to dodge. There's a lot of big tree heavens down by Omaha, for example. And no, it's only found as far west as the Chicago area now. But in 2014, it was found in Pennsylvania. It came from Asia. Well, about a 10-year jump, 10 more years. I bet we see it out here. All it takes is an egg mass laid on a recreational vehicle. Somebody drives a recreational vehicle out, does a little recreating, eggs hatch, and then welcome to the Great Plains. We'll have spotted lanternfly. So with that, I'll toss this up here. It's the title. And by the way, for all you folks self-reporting, you do have to have the title on there as written. So make sure you're copying that down. Herbicide management for windbreaks and landscapes. If you want the code for that, and you only need the code if you're an ISA certified arborist for your CEUs, it is DS, dash 25 dash 027. All right, so that's it for me. I will stop sharing right now and go back to Tony to see if we have, well, I'll leave this up here for a minute to see if we might have any questions on today.
There are a couple questions, Dr. Ball, and thank you so much for that presentation and the updates that followed. I did put the link to the carryover website, the Herbicide carryover
Thank you.
PDF in the chat. So if those interested and didn't get a chance to copy it, it is there in the chat box somewhere. Thanks to those who chimed in from all over the place. Looks like at least 4 different states on today's call, and almost 80 people chimed in. So happy to have everybody. We have a couple of questions in the chat,
All right.
and maybe 1 or 2 might pour in, but Chelly's wondering, what can I spray near the base of mature spruce to kill volunteer deciduous growth?
The short answer is nothing. Almost all those products end up killing the trees. If it's short material, and I mean short, you can get a wick and glyphosate, and essentially you're painting the glyphosate on the deciduous trees and kill them, because with glyphosate, it will move through the plant, but it will not move out into the soil. And so again, it's almost a roller or a wick applicator. But almost all the products that you could apply as a herbicide, in other words, I just want to spray the herbicide underneath it. Many of those will say they'll kill spruce. So, and I've seen it where you spray like ash, which is very tolerant, a lot of these things. You don't affect the ash at all, but you've killed the spruce. They're underneath. And I do look at a lot of those. So a wick applicator, or the other is cut the plants, the small trees out, and either paint that cut with something like a glyphosate that doesn't translocate. Certainly don't use a Tordon, but I'm afraid that is a tough thing because I've seen too much damage of trying to do that.
And Jared chimed in the chat that the weed dabber works pretty well for that application. So there's a
Thank
product
you.
you can look up, Shelly, if you're interested. Lori's curious if you could define what you mean by settled a little more when you talk about the soil being settled before we apply. Was
Okay.
it packed around the roots, or do we need to wait for a little more rain?
Ah, and you hit that one. A little bit more rain. What it is, you don't want any air gaps. So it's certainly you want to tamp the soil so it's packed. But what you really need is rain or water so that you've removed any of those small little air gaps around the root system. And that so settled is that you just no longer have any air pockets other than what occurs in macropores around the trees. And having said that, I was out looking at one where literally I could pull now the dead and dying seedlings out of the ground, and you could tell it wasn't packed at all. It was crumbling around it. So as long as you water it in, you're going to have it settle. But note some of them, like Caseron, still say 4 weeks. So it's usually to add the stuff, you are going to be waiting for some of them, perhaps just a few days, maybe a week, because, that's the other dilemma. You've got to apply it after the soil is settled, but before the weed seeds have germinated by that and started to grow, because then the pre-emergent isn't going to work. So you're right. It's a tight window.
That looks to be all the questions for now. Jared even threw a link to that weed wand, if anybody's interested there in the chat box. But
Thank you,
uh,
Jared. Those save a lot of trees.
got a couple more certified forester credentials coming in. Again, if you are a certified arborist through the ISA, you'll be self-reporting with that code and the title from Dr. Ball's last slide there. And that will take us to time. I appreciate everybody's. Oh, we got one more question as I'm speaking here. Can you spot treat stumps with something like Grazon?
The short answer is no. Um, I've seen it would have to be done very, very, very carefully because I have seen some injuries with that. I just grind the stumps the best way.
Very well. Well, thanks again, everybody, for your time. And Dr. Ball, thank you. Stay tuned. We'll send an announcement in the coming weeks for our next workshop. And we'll catch you on the next one.
All right. Thanks, everybody.